All right. Well, once again, welcome. This is session 4 of what I think will be 8 sessions. And I will attempt to give you a quick overview to kind of get you going mentally again with the whole deal. We're talking about a burial cloth that was used in the 1st century by the Hebrew people in the Middle East, where we first spent time looking at the various marks that happened to be on it, identifying some of the methods that were used to actually whip the victim. We looked at several possibilities of how they would deal with the arm. We think this is pretty close to the way it was with the space of destined, although it may be in the Z area, which is over just one bone. We looked to realize that there's more than one way that they did feet, but the one that was applied to Shroud Man, the one in the thing we're looking at, was actually through the feet, and it was required then the person to move up and down almost in a seesaw fashion, so long as they wanted to have their breath and then exhale the breath. And this would then go on for hours, pushing against not only the nerves in the arms, but also the nerves in the feet. We talked about the fact that their Eastern crown is different than the one we think of with our wreath. It would cover the entire head, probably maybe more like 30 different spikes. Certainly some of them are quite obvious on the shroud. We found that when we finally had photography available in 1898, that the shroud is a negative rather than a positive. It was different than what we thought we were going to get. But even more surprising, in 1976 and 78, when we got the VP8 image analyzer, we found out that this image is nearer to radar than this to photography. And so they were able to do a variety of things with that. We were finding toward the end of one of our sessions that we had reached the point that in looking at the blood clots, we have somehow removed the body from the cloth in a manner that we describe as being impossible. That is, you've taken the body, removed it, left no way to see evidence of having removed it. And that, when they tried, say, in the year 2000 to give the best hypothesis of what happened, this dematerialized word shows up. And I told you the nearest thing I think of to give you an image is to think in terms of beam me up, Scotty, in the old Star Trek movies. How that happens, of course, is a quite open idea. We looked at a variety of things, coins, soil, and so forth, wood, but just pick one of them. The soil is limited as to where it occurs in the entire world. So that is a pretty good clue that it's around Jerusalem that this happened. The big update, of course, is that 2 men in Italy have developed 3 different techniques of trying to date threads. And all 3 of them suggest that the cloth is old enough to have been the one that would have been Jesus of Nazareth. We attempted to figure out the last time, could everything fit together with what Scripture talks about time-wise and what the blood interval requires, and all the other issues of the sudarium, could it all fit together? And we found a picture kind of like this as our ending picture of everything seems to fall in place, and actually you could adjust it up and down time-wise a little bit without any great problem. And as we were ending last time, we were talking about characteristic of science number 9, where you try to replicate to verify what you think you've found as a scientist. The point of it is not to replicate it. The point of it is to verify it in some way. So in this case, we're not asking someone to become Shroud Man again and climb in and be crucified. The question is there anything else we could look at that might verify these kinds of facts? And we were looking at this cloth called the sudarium. So we quickly stopped by and talked about its history. And at least from 761, it's been sitting in the same chest in Oviedo, Spain. So we know it's a lot earlier than the time that was received in the 1988 carbon dating. So that kind of pushes it back again. So at any rate, we're up to characteristic number 9, and we're starting to struggle because we've realized that in eliminating the alternatives in the hypotheses, yes, we're always open. The question is, what do you do if every complete hypothesis you've been able to come up with doesn't work? Could it be that there are several partial hypotheses or one and something else that somehow will work? And so the men and women who've been of the original group, the stirrup, are of course now at the point of dying. Their careers are over. And fortunately, there's a new group that started in 2002 under one name, went under another name, and finally by 2005 is under Shroud Study Group. As you can see, 147 scientists with 2,100 emails kind of yearly. This is a pretty serious group of people. It's around the world, but the best I've been able to tell, that it's more European this time and less American this time. They propose 2 possibilities to be thought about a lot. Maillard reaction is one of them, but it would require some other mechanism, or maybe more than one other mechanism, to get the results. They say you get a chemical reaction between the amino acids and the reducing sugars. And we're used to seeing that in our dinner rolls and stuff like that, but they're thinking there'd have to be at least one other, if not more than one other, alternative involved. But the one that seems to be getting most of the attention recently is called a corona discharge. And in this, you have an electrical discharge caused by the ionization of a fluid, such as air, surrounding a conductor carrying, now high is really high. Now these occur naturally and so forth. This is nothing unusual, but when they proposed this one, the people in the Shroud Study Group have made a statement in their official image or official wording. The corona discharge may be caused by various more or less scientifically identified sources, such as lightning, earthquakes, and radioactive environments. But perhaps the truth lies beyond science. Some consider that imaging on the Turin shroud by corona discharge may be a byproduct of the resurrection, and this may be why the image cannot be reproduced scientifically. Whoa, that's quite a statement. So I thought, okay, why don't we have a replication about this question of, do miracles happen? Take it this a different direction. The whole point is, can you verify it in some way? So I'm going to try one. Hang on to your seats if you've never thought about this particular topic before. From 1531 to the present, in where we call Mexico City, there has been a picture, for lack of a better word, that has scientists and others greatly impacted. It's important to realize that the left side of it is the original. That what we see on the right and what you see on all the stuff that's pretty much showing is painted on extra later on. So the stars and so forth and all the rays sticking outside, that's not part of the original. There are 3 documents that we could point to. One of them is from an annual yearbook of 1556, and it talks about Our Lady descended At the same time, there came a comet. Or we have a codex. And the date has to be changed to match what you and I work with. So 1531. It shows the date on the codex, the eclipse, Virgin of Guadalupe descending, and a comet. Or the third documentation is called a tribute roll. Now they call it a pictorial calendar. Usually we think of a calendar before, but this is actually near to our concept of diary after the fact happened. And you can see a lot of different images on this pictorial roll. Enlarging the one area, you can see a picture that's involved. But the one element I'd like you to especially notice how little of the cactus cloth that it's based on exists. In other words, cactus material goes quickly, as we're going to see. So here's the story. If you've never heard this before, maybe you'll be intrigued by it. An Indian and his wife's uncle were among the first converted to Christianity. And on a particular day, one goes to Mass early. And as he goes by a particular hill, he hears birds that shouldn't have been around. And for whatever reason, he decides to investigate and he finds the Virgin Mary. He's told by the Virgin Mary to go tell the bishop to build her a church on this hill. Well, of course, the bishop, probably like you and me, didn't believe the story, so he asked for proof. Well, one misses a day dealing with his sick uncle, but when he's back, Virgin Mary tells him, don't worry about your uncle. Rather, go up on the hill and pick roses that shouldn't be there, even though they're in full bloom. Then she arranges those in his tilma, tells him not to open it. That's his clothing, his outer clothing. Tells him not to open it to anyone except the bishop. When he goes to the bishop's headquarters, the servants see his out-of-season flowers sticking out of the tilma, and they let him in pretty quickly. He tells his story, and when he opens the tilma, the flowers fall out, and the image is seen on his tilma. He, on the other hand, is behind it, so he's not seen. The bishop and the others fall to their knees. The next day, of course, as you can guess, the bishop went to the hill. I bet he did. And they decided to name the church Our Lady of Guadalupe for a town in Spain where a statue had been found 200 years before. And as you can see, in 7 years, 8 million natives converted to Christianity. Like the Shroud and the Sudarium, there's been a full-fledged scientific investigation of the tilma. And here you see an example of the magnification of a thread. Cactus cloth normally falls apart in 20 years. And we have this one that's hanging in now for 500 years. There's no sign of decay with this tilma. The colors that haven't been touched on are just as bright as the original. One of the things they haven't been able to explain is how a large green oval spot seen on the back can't be seen on the front. But all the colors on the front can be seen fully on the back. They're not sure how, from the back, people can see through the cloth, as it seems to be translucent just one direction. They can't figure out how it survived in the niter of the humid air, although nearby artwork goes away. They can't paint on cactus cloth, except on this particular cactus cloth. When they by accident spilled cleaning fluid on the image, it did almost no damage. The artists and the naturalists have noticed an odd property about the colors. Beyond 6 or 7 feet, the colors seem to shift in color tone, something that artists don't know how to do. But we notice there's some birds and butterflies and brightly colored beetles that do the same thing. I don't know why, but in 1950, a doctor took an ophthalmoscope. He looked in the Virgin Guadalupe's eye, and he found it's like a human eye. The Perkinyi-Sanson law states that when you see an object, it's going to appear in 4 places because of the curvature of your corona. And 3 are going to be upright, and 1's going to be upside. I'm 1 up and 2 upside, 3 upside down. Well, when he looks through, he sees what you see at the bottom, below the blue. And he thinks that looks like something understandable. So computers get it invented, and they scan what is seen and turning it over so it's a little bit easier for us to understand. What they're seeing are the 14 people who were in the room when he opened the deal. And the 2 you see in the circle are the bishop and the translator, and they know who they are from nearby artwork done at the time. I'm intrigued by this one. I can almost imagine the Trinity having fun saying, what will we do this time to really mess with the heads of the people who are going to try to figure out this one? And one of the Trinity says, well, let's put a picture in it. That'll give them trouble. And another one says that's one of the neatest tricks you've ever tried. And then the next one says, well, you know, you ought to inspire one person to make an artwork of the translator and the bishop. So when they ask this question later on, they can even figure out who they are. Wow, what a neat deal. Well, at any rate, today, there's a half silver cover now over the back of this cloth. Bulletproof cover, needless to say. They have a new basilica in which it's showing, and it's around 10 million people who come annually. And you can understand then why images like this, be it the upper right one that you see, or in a grocery store, the left one, which is the candle, you can see why these things sell. This has really touched a lot of people. So back to this replication to verify, and the question of, do we have miracles? Well, let me talk about that a little bit. From a logic point of view, which one do you think is more likely, that the shroud is genuine by a miracle in 29, or that it's a perfect fake made any year by someone who didn't have the knowledge of the tools? And I'm going to give you 2 reasons why I'm inclined to go with a miracle. In science, we have a concept called Occam's razor. That is, it's attributed to William of Occam, although he may not be the only one that had with this. And probably the best paraphrase is, the simplest explanation is most likely the right one. And as an example of its application, years ago when we were absolutely sure as a group of people that the sun went around the earth, well, that's fine as you look at it. But on the other hand, as they watched all the other heavenly bodies, they noticed stars were going forward, and then they made a loop and went backwards, and then they went forward again. And then they found others, you had to say, well, they had an epicycle on their epicycle to make sense of what we're seeing. But it becomes a whole lot easier to clear up all this stuff of epicycles and cycles and all this if you simply say the earth goes around the sun, and suddenly all the rest of it is clear. And of course, that's exactly what happened. Although, you know, our religious groups aren't necessarily happy about having that to be the discussion point. And the other thing that I would raise, except for Shroud Man's body and whatever it did, most of the other finds seem like they're within the noble range of science and medicine. So for these two reasons, I'm inclined to go with a miracle. And I'll tell you a little bit more as we go. We know that if you take a body and you put enough electricity in it to get a corona discharge, you can transfer an image to cloth within an inch or so. I show you two slides. I watched this where the two gentlemen were giving their presentation. Third image down, you see the half-size mannequin that they used. You see the second slide down, you see the discharge that they put on it. You see at the bottom, the image they were able to get from it. But if you look at the top, they use 300,000 volts. That's a lot of power. So if you upscale to full length and full volume of the mannequin, probably what, 900,000? It would be a great deal of electricity to make it happen. Of course, that asks the question, I guess, could you think that Jesus of Nazareth in a shroud could do something like that? Could that kind of light or whatever be involved? Well, one clue might be the transfiguration. Somehow or another, as he went to Jerusalem, he shone greatly like the sun. We also know that St. Paul gets knocked off his horse when he goes to Damascus to arrest people. And it could be described as being light in that case. So maybe yes. What about the issue of the dematerializing? You'd have to have that enter into the equation too. How do you get the body out of the shroud? Maybe the light makes the image, but can you get the body out? Well, we have text where Jesus is trying to tell Mary, don't hang on to me. For whatever reason, we don't know. But maybe he wasn't quite the normal body he had been before. We know that as he walked the road to Emmaus with people, and he told them about what he had in mind versus what they had and their hopes, and they finally invited him in for supper, and as he broke bread, he disappeared. We know that in the upper room, they talked about when he arrived there, he could eat fish in their presence, but he could also come through doors that were locked. So maybe both light and dematerialization and corona discharge, I can get coronavirus here on my head, right? Corona discharge, maybe we're zeroing in on enough elements that someone can attempt to hypothesize all the pieces that would come together. Something for you to think about in your spare time. Now, I'll take this one step further. I have for me, a conception of a miracle. This may not be yours, this may not be historical, but this is my way I look at it. The things you and I are used to seeing, we're used to 3 dimensions. And even if we add the 4th dimension of time into it, we're used to this, and we know that laws are being found by people of science to understand things. How many dimensions? Well, string theory seems to be thinking 10, M theories maybe 11, and Lisa Randall at Harvard says 28, and I have a hard time counting to 28, let alone trying to think of 28. This blows my mind. This is far beyond anything I want to think about. But for me, there is, in some manner, a dimension beyond the one that I commonly think about. Of course, you could call it supernatural if you like. And it seems to me that what Jesus did as they came into Jerusalem was allowing 3 disciples to witness him stepping into another dimension and having a discussion with Elijah and Moses, who were theoretically, from our point of view, dead people. But it wasn't just that he said, oh, look over here, here they are in their tombs. He was saying, I am talking to them, as if they are still alive, but it's somehow different. Now, the three, Peter, James, and John, that's no small deal, because in the Hebrew court that day, if you could get three people to testify individually and away from each other to the same thing, that was sufficient to establish it in a court of law. Well, do we have laws in these areas that are? Yes, I would think so. And for me, to me, a miracle is when the laws of the supernatural overtake the laws of other dimensions. And I would say it'd be locally and temporarily. I know years ago there was a movie called Death Takes a Holiday, I think it is. I didn't see the movie, but the idea of it was at a particular time, death just didn't happen. And it was everywhere. That's not the way I envision miracle. I envision miracle being something that happens one place, one time, and another place, maybe again, different kind of miracle. And to me, one way to try to understand this whole business of the shroud is that the resurrection is some of the laws of the supernatural overwhelming all the laws that we know in the dimensions that you and I are used to studying. Well, wow. If that wasn't wild enough, let me know. I'll try something else. Characteristics of science number 10, our final one, is collegiality. Science is not a one-person effort. Any concept can be discussed verbally, and it gets real serious once you put it in writing. The idea is to have input and feedback. Arguments are supposed to be made without emotion, either for or against. You're supposed to have peer reviewing of materials, which is, of course, quite opposite to what the websites are doing more and more. And you have to share your resources and references so there can be other evaluations done by others. Now, the shroud has been subject to a lot of problems. They've had publicity problems. Around year 33, the shroud apparently was not routinely available, best we can tell so far. Somewhere in the 200s, it was hidden in Odessa. Around 525, the Monophysites kept hiding it even though they knew about it. In the 550s, they only showed the shroud as a face. In the 1300s, the Knight Templars didn't want to talk about what they see or where they got it. In the 1400s, the House of Savoy, which was the king of Italy, rarely displayed the shroud. In fact, one family member said, I think it's a fake. In 1898, well, for 33 years, they said Seconda Pia's photographs were fakes. And in 1983 and thereafter, a Roman Catholic Church, which now owns the shroud, rarely displays it. So you can see publicity-wise, several things work against it. It's also had falsification problems. In 1902, two clergy built a false memo that for 99 years really made people struggle with what is this thing, because they talked about someone who had made an artwork. It was finally found to be a fake. In 1988, we had scientists who said they would do anything to discredit Stirp. Wow, that's not exactly what you expect. Also had some that took $1 million or £1 million to discredit the shroud, and that was one of the laboratories. In 1990, you had a Russian who faked data on the uptake of carbon, which was a problem. 1995 and thereafter, we still have the debunked data on our websites, even though it's now clearly false information. Well, skipping all what I just talked about, collegiality has had its problems too. In 1898, you had a Catholic and an agnostic that were not allowed to publish. In 1969, the Secret Commission didn't do anything worthwhile. In 1973, the study members wouldn't collaborate with each other. In 1978, Macron wouldn't allow peer review of his things. He published it quickly in his own journal, his website, and that website's still out there today, which says it's a painting. Of course, the 1988 carbon dating, they refused to have a peer review also. And they violated the test protocol, even took the materials off camera, was supposed to be recording to prove that the thing was being done correctly. And obviously, we've now found that they have an invalid conclusion. And then I have one at the bottom, 2014, with a question mark at each end. I've pointed out that Fonte and Malfi invented 3 techniques to measure years of threads, which they applied. And in my materials that I've been working with, I've bumped into one person who said that they would not allow review. I can tell you that I have their book. I can tell you that I have watched their presentations at a symposium. So I don't know what the issue may be, and it may no longer be a relevant issue. It may have been something that happened years before. But at any rate, I put a question mark at each end because it may be a valid concern. But at any rate, what you're hopefully getting out of this is that science is not supposed to be a one-person event. You're supposed to be able to talk about what your research is, get ideas. People shoot you down. Carol and I had great fun in Paris one time when our son made a presentation and we asked questions that he hadn't thought about. Before it was over, he had thought about them, but it was just one of those intriguing things. He thought he was going to have a wonderful time, and his wife and his mother and his father were there, and they asked all kinds of questions, and it didn't go quite the way he thought it was going to go. But anyway, feedback is supposed to be encouraged. Hopefully you'll make a better product of your research and so forth. So from that point of view, I'll show you some things that I'm going to share with you. For all of you that I have an address, before the time that we need it, I'm going to mail to you a summary of the major findings and also the references and other things. And it will make it a lot easier in our last 2 sessions if you have that paper in your hand rather than just looking at your screen. But that's yet to be accomplished. But at any rate, all this reference material will be in it. So there's no need tonight, in case you're interested, to hurry and try to write things down. You're going to get shipped to you here real soon. The red one, the 2 in red would be ones I would really recommend. The Resurrection of the Shroud we'll talk about in a minute. Dr. Calvary, I told you, is where I started. That's the great medical one that I've been able to start with, and also believe it's still one of the best ones. As you can see, there are others of all kinds of natures over the years. You have things that you have now reached the point you'd say, okay, but it's more secondary kinds of things if you're, really want to getting into it. Like King Arthur, hero and legend, you might find some surprising things. The death of King Arthur. We'll get to this before this is over. Other possibilities along the way. Jesus outside the New Testament, if you wish to go in a slightly different direction. We have some that I honestly could tell you I have read mainly because they are opposed, and I don't think they really present an adequate view. This one is one that says, okay, there was someone else crucified, and that was in the 1200s. Some have gotten to the point they're so old now that while at the time that was breaking stuff, it's now minor details. There are websites, but if you want to get into websites, I'll show you one in particular. Duke here in the middle is being referred to, and you see an animation. Duke University had a bunch of these, and I downloaded them, fortunately, at the time, because they don't seem to be currently available unless they've decided to reload them out there. But anyway, it's trying to take images to see, could they be related to each other in some way. As you see near the bottom, there's a Muslim Shroud of Turin website. So there's a lot of things out there. If you have an interest in reading, this is probably the book I would recommend first, The Resurrection Shroud. And one of the reasons I would say, even though it's now 20 years old, it covers pretty much the whole deal. It will not have in, obviously, the update about carbon dating. I'm sorry, updating the techniques of how we can date threads that Fonte and Malfi have shown. But you get your way through the science, the history, and things related to religion all in one book. So that's why I would put it as one of the better choices. If you want to get past that, then I would suggest you go to shroud.com, which is on the website. Barry Swartz has done an amazing service to anyone with an interest in the Shroud. He was the photographer in the 1978 science work. He said that he didn't really know what he was going to do with himself at one point in his life. And he was in a grocery store and could see in the rack that someone was trying to sell one of those magazine kinds of things they put there, suggesting that the Shroud of Turin was really a famous artist faking it. And that blew his mind, that people had no clue as to what it was, because it had meant so much to him. So he decided he would set up a website. It is a huge one. Over 7 million people have looked at it. He has great care in terms of what is put there. It's truly international. There's all kinds of material in other languages. They have tried to make materials available that you can buy. For example, I told you if we'd been meeting in person, I would have handed around this miniature shroud device that I have. And I would suggest you go there. And I'm intrigued mainly, well, not mainly, but I'm intrigued because he's Jewish. He gives talks, sometimes, it's like 3 or 4 a day of presenting this. He's been in the odd situation, which has led to chuckles, that you have a person who of Jewish background arguing that it's authentic against a Christian who's arguing that it's not authentic, which is kind of a strange position to be in. If you want to then go past that level, then the book that came out in 2015 by Fonte and Malfi would be the next book I would suggest. It cost me $65 from Amazon in hardback. I don't know whether paperback's available or not, but it's being processed through Singapore, so possibly the expenses are greater. But this is the one that has the most recent issues about how can we test the threads and know that the threads of the Shroud of Turin are as old as we think they are. So, at any rate, well, as I said, the groups doing the science have moved on from the old Stirp group, and this new group, the Shroud Science group, has formed. And maybe that's appropriate because the Shrouds moved on too. In 2002, the current owner, the church, Roman Catholic Church, finally came to a decision after all kinds of arguments and complaints about how to conserve the shroud. During that summer, they removed 30 patches that were put there by the Poor Clare nuns back in the 1500s. They removed the backing cloth. They called it a Holland cloth, and it's been replaced by another cloth from Holland. Where they took the patches off, underneath there is debris from the fire, and they did save it by location mapping so that they would be able to use it for research purposes. When they smoothed the fabric, not being now nailed down to the Holland cloth, the size measurements shifted about 1%. So maybe the shroud man is about a half an inch taller in a current scenario. The people who are the science people are very much upset about what was done because they thought that certain things should have been done for the purposes of making sure you could correctly do science then. And they also say it wasn't done with proper clothing and gloves and all that. What they've done is to put it flat, permanently flat, as opposed to rolling it up as they did in the past. And they had a milled display case, but this time it's stored in 99.5 argon gas. The fear is that the image and the background at some point in the future, some point not being specified, would become identical. That is, as the background, shall we say, ages, it might slowly catch the aging that prematurely happened when this event occurred in the shroud. So they have permanently put it into something that hopefully will stop the aging of the background. They had two different groups come in and photograph the shroud, both sides this time for the first time ever. And when they did, they found that on the, shall we say, backside, underside, however you want to look at it, you, by some processes, and I think, Ken, this was something you raised with me 2 or 3 days ago, by some processes involving filters and matching and transforms, they are able to detect some faint images. It's nothing like on the inside, shall we say, of the shroud. We get some of the nose, eyes, hair, beard, mustache, a little bit of the hands, but nothing of the shoulders and the back. So it's not remotely like the image before. It exactly corresponds to the frontal image. But it makes me strain because now you're saying that you have a little bit of image on one side of a thread, and a little bit of image on the other side of the thread with white in between. I have read one place a point that I cannot take beyond what I'm going to say. It sounded like the corona discharge might be able to account for an image on each side of the thread. And that's pretty much where I have to stop. It's something I should say I'll be working on. See if I can get someone who can explain to me how that is a possibility. But that is certainly quite a challenge. In 2006, they started talking about the chiaroscuro, I think. Chiaroscuro. Joan, I need you to help me probably with that one. It's the way in which artists attempt to make a sense of dimension using only black and white as the technique. And in this, you can see the second image here trying to show you don't see anything there except black and white or variations of it, and yet you get quite a sense of dimension. So here's the statement that was made. A most interesting aspect of the Shroud of Turin is the visual nature of the image, the illusion of chiaroscuro. Chiaroscuro, the use of light and shade independent of color to give a sense of dimensionality to the picture. For some people, the Shroud of Turin, chiaroscuro, is a powerful indication that the image is miraculous, even though science cannot support that idea. The idea is all the more compelling because in reality, we're very certain that the image is not a true chiaroscuro. Chiaroscuro in art is an illusion. It's one of the many techniques that the artist uses to give a sense of dimensionality and depth to a picture. But computerized image analysis of the images on the Shroud of Turin indicates that what we perceive as a play of light in the images is not and cannot be light. Yeah, right. The illusion is an illusion of an illusion, and that doesn't make any sense. I amended that one. I am totally lost as to what this means. We do remember when we were talking about Virgin Guadalupe that sometimes colors tend to shift, and we don't really know how to make it do that, even though we see it in nature. And I just raised that as a related topic. Also updated in 2007, we have a textile expert who gives the verbal opinion after, obviously, now the shroud's been placed in its new technique, that the weave techniques is seen only in one other cloth from Masada, which of course then puts it back near the 1st century. Now, you guys have been following me a little bit here in the science stuff, the characteristics. So is she an expert in the field? Yes. Did she have access to the shroud data? Yes. Is she biased? Don't know. Has she ever published this? No. Could some replication maybe be done? Yeah, probably could. Has it been done? No. Does it fit with the other evidence? Well, yeah. Did she seek contrary opinions? No. Does it fit the time frame? Yes. And so I just point out, we're talking about characteristics of science, and you see some possibilities in there that we could work on if we did all the characteristics. If she puts it in writing, then we get people of differing opinions. We get replications. We look for contrary. Remember all these things we've been talking about along the way. We're now at the point of saying this would be the next step that she would need to take if she wants to do it. And of course, she may not want to do it. Well, we've reached the end of tonight's session. We've completed 4 looks in 4 weeks of looking at the science side of the shroud. I don't know how you feel about it or how you enjoy that part of it. You may like more. Some of the people that have listened in the past say, oh, I like the history part better. And others say, I like the religion part better. So maybe the next 2 sessions where we talk about the history will be much more interesting for you. Or maybe the last 2 where with a document in your hand that I'll send to you, that will be maybe more interesting that way too.